Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, November 30th, 2023. I am thrilled to be with you. I missed you last week, but I was having a very, very good time with my family in New York celebrating American Thanksgiving. We had a wonderful time, but I'm very happy to be back with you, and hopefully we will be continuing in a consistent fashion with God's help. I'm sure you have realized how often the Torah tells us about siblings. From the very beginning of the Torah, Cain and Abel, Yitzchak and Yishmael, Yaakov and Esav, Rachel and Leah, Yosef and his brothers, Moshe, Aharon and Miriam, on and on and on and on, the Torah tells us narratives about siblings. Just think for a moment how much of the Torah's narrative relates to siblings. Why is that? So I want to share with you two unrelated answers. The first answer comes from Rabbi David Wolpe, and he explains that the Torah, in speaking so much about siblings, brothers and sisters, the Torah is telling us something very, very important about human nature. And that is that ultimately our lives are shaped by our own choices. Yes, there are differences in families, and there are differences in circumstances. And it is true that some people, based on the family into which they are born, have a more difficult road than others. But the Torah teaches us, and we see this over and over and over again, that even when two people grow up in the same household, with the same parents, in the same circumstances, they can become very, very different. Because we are the choices that we make. And the Torah wants to underscore this, to show us how different siblings can be, because this is a tremendously important message of empowerment. You can overcome the most difficult challenges if you recognize your own ability to forge your destiny, your identity. This is a fundamental belief in Judaism. Bechira Chavshis. Every person has the opportunity, the ability to choose between right and wrong in any given circumstance, regardless of the environment in which you grew up, in which you're used to. Yes, that environment can make it more difficult, or it can make it easier to choose the right path. But ultimately, says Rabbi Wolpe, we do not choose the blessings we inherit, but we do choose the blessings we become. Being born into a wonderful family is no guarantee of your success in life. And being born into a dysfunctional family, while it is tragic, likewise does not determine how you will turn out in life. With hard work, it is overcomable, not just to survive, but to achieve greatness. It's up to you, it's up to me to choose, not based just on our birth. So I want to share now a second very, very different answer, unrelated. And that is that all of these siblings, all of the siblings mentioned anywhere in the Torah, fall on either side of a divide. Either they are siblings who are able to argue without anger, or they are siblings whose disagreement escalates to anger and hatred. Those are the only two choices. Every sibling family will fall into one or the other category. None of the siblings in the Torah gets along all the time. That doesn't exist. Only those two choices. And the Torah wants us to learn a crucial, valuable skill, something that we need throughout our lives: how to fight properly. In 2017, there was a great article in the New York Times, and the title of the article, written by Adam Grant, "Kids, would you please start fighting?" So he writes about a celebrated sibling pair, a pair of brothers in American history, Wilbur and Orville Wright. They grew up playing together. They went into the newspaper business together. And they built an airplane together. They even said about each other that they thought together. Now, when the Wright brothers said that they thought together, what they really meant is they argued together. They argued all the time. One of the pivotal decisions in the design of the airplane that they finally built was the design of the propeller. And the two of them, Wilbur and Orville, had two different opinions about how the propeller should be designed. And they would argue back and forth, shouting, yelling at each other back and forth, until finally each one arrived at the conclusion of the other. They switched positions. Now, it turned out that the answer was they needed two propellers, each one rotating in the opposite direction. Okay, that's just the physics of it. But here's the point. The mechanic who worked for them said, "I don't think they really got mad, but they sure got awfully hot." And that's the skill. The skill to getting hot without getting mad. It is critical in life. And very often, Adam Grant makes the argument, we as parents, grandparents, do the opposite of fostering this. For example, we want to give our children a stable home. Yes, of course, we want to give our children a stable home, of course. So we stop siblings from quarreling with each other. And we have our own arguments behind closed doors. But it would be much healthier for children if we were teaching our children how to argue. For our society to remain free and open, kids need to learn the value of open disagreement. Let me just add, adults need to learn this desperately in our society. We're just missing this. But here's the key. It turns out that highly creative adults often grow up in families filled with tension. Not fistfights, God forbid, or personal insults, God forbid, but real disagreements when adults in their early 30s are asked to write imaginative stories. The most creative stories come from those whose parents had the most conflict 25 years earlier. Maybe they had clashing views on how to raise children. Maybe they had different values or attitudes. Similarly, highly creative architects and scientists were compared with their technically skilled but less original peers, and the innovators often had more friction in their families. The psychologist Robert Albert, who studied this, wrote, "The creative person to be comes from a family that is anything but harmonious, one with a wobble." Wilbur and Orville Wright came from a wobbly family. Miriam, Aharon, and Moshe came from a wobbly family. They differed in style and in substance. They argued passionately, but it was without rancor, without anger. Most of the other siblings in the Torah do not manage that. The most extreme example, of course, is Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel. But it's either or. Either there's arguing that does not progress to rage and anger, or there's arguing that, God forbid, does progress to rage and anger. We do not find siblings in the Torah who never argue. For the Wright brothers, conflict was something to embrace and resolve. Children need to learn the value of thoughtful disagreement. Sadly, many parents teach kids that if they disagree with someone, they should hold it inside. They shouldn't say anything, because it disrespects the other person to disagree with their opinion. But that's not what we should be teaching our children. We should be teaching them that it's a sign of respect to care enough about what someone says to civilly, respectfully be willing to challenge it. We, parents and grandparents, can help by having disagreements openly. Not like most parents who try usually fail to hide their conflicts. But when parents disagree with each other, children learn to think for themselves. They discover there is no monopoly on truth. There are different opinions. And what the research shows, Dr. Albert says, is that it doesn't matter how often parents argue. What counts is how they handle arguments when they happen. And we can start with 4 rules. 4 rules of how to argue, how to fight. Rule number 1, frame it as a debate rather than a conflict. Rule number 2, argue as if you're right, but listen as if you're wrong. That is so important and so rare. Number 3, make the most respectful interpretation of the other person's perspective. Here too, we often assume the worst motive in what someone else is saying or doing. And number 4, acknowledge where you agree with your critics and what you've learned from them. 4 critically important rules, guidelines, for how to argue in a way that builds healthy character. Good families are wobbly. The family might rock back and forth, but it won't tip over. If kids don't learn to wobble, they never learn to walk. And they end up standing still. This is an essential lesson that the siblings in the Torah teach us. I want to move to another topic. It's a controversial subject. It's complicated. It's more complicated than we can fully cover tonight. It is critically relevant today. and it is derived from our Torah portion, the Parsha VaYishlach. So the Torah tells the following narrative. Vatetse Dinah bas Leah. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, the daughter of Yaakov, goes out into the world. Vayar osa Shechem. And there's a man who sees her and who is attracted to her. His name is Shechem. Now, by the way, this is the only daughter of Yaakov that we are told about in the Torah. There are different opinions among the commentaries of whether Yaakov had other daughters, but Dinah is the only one who is mentioned. So this man named Shechem, whose father was named Hamor, Shechem was a prince. Hamor was the chief of his area. Shechem, his son, was the prince. And the Torah says, Vayikach osa, Vayishkav osa, Vayaneha. Now it's very, very complicated how to translate those words. I'll try just for a literal translation. Vayikach osa, and he took her. Vayishkav osa, and he slept with her. Vayaneha, and he demeaned her. It is very unclear from the words and from the commentators exactly what happened. Did he rape her? One opinion. Did he abduct her? Another opinion. Did he seduce her? A third opinion. What is her opinion or role in all of this? The Torah doesn't tell us. So it is a narrative that starts off with a lot of mystery. It's not clear to us. Something bad happened. It's not clear exactly what it is. But whatever it was, this man, Shechem, fell in love with Dinah. And he said to his father, you have to help me arrange that I should be able to marry this woman. So, the Torah says, V'Yakov shama, Yaakov heard, ki time es Dinah bito, that his daughter Dinah had been defiled. So again, that word defiled, what does that tell us about what happened exactly? It's unclear. Yaakov hears about it. At the time that Yaakov hears about this terrible thing, his sons are out in the field. V'hechrish Yaakov ad boam. Yaakov is silent until they return. Very strange. Yaakov doesn't have an immediate reaction to what happened to his own daughter. He waits for his sons to come back in. Why does he do that? It's not clear. Now, Hamor, the father of this young man Shechem, comes to speak with Yaakov. El Yaakov ledaber ito. So Hamor comes to speak to Yaakov, the father of Dinah, as if there's some kind of arrangement that they're going to make. Meanwhile, Ubnei Yaakov bo min hasadeh. In the meanwhile, the sons of Yaakov come home. They hear about what happened to their sister Dinah. Vayichar lehem ma'od. They are very, very angry at what happened to their sister. Ki nevala asa b'Yisrael, because a terrible, despicable thing has happened to the family of Israel. So they're very, very angry with Shechem and, by extension, his father Hamor. Vayedaber Hamor itam lemor. And Hamor speaks to them, saying, my son Shechem has fallen in love with Dinah. Can we work something out? Something very strange in the text. You notice, Hamor came to speak to Yaakov. Why are the brothers part of this conversation? Why is Hamor now speaking to Yaakov and the brothers? Why is Yaakov not speaking up at all? Because as soon as Hamor makes his presentation of his son's infatuation and an arrangement, Vayanu b'nei Yaakov es Shechem ve'es Hamor, Yaakov doesn't answer. His sons answer. And his sons answer b'mirma, with a trick. They're planning a trick of which Shechem and Hamor are unaware. Now, again, I keep repeating this. Why didn't Yaakov respond to this overture of Shechem and Hamor? And when Yaakov hears his sons, what they're about to say, does Yaakov realize it is b'mirma, that there's an underlying false motive here? The Torah doesn't tell us. But they say, here's the deal. We can work this out. The only thing is, we can only have an alliance if all of the men will have bris milah, circumcision. It's a very strange thing to say, because whatever reason they would have for saying it would apply to Shechem, who was ostensibly going to have this relationship with Dinah. Why should all of the men in the entire area have to have bris milah? The Torah is not clear. But this is part of a plan. And Shechem and Hamor agreed to it. They go back to their home and they get all of the men to agree with it. And Vayishmu el Hamor ve'el Shechem beno. Every single male of this city or this region listens to the request of Hamor and Shechem, his son. Vayimolu kol zachar kol yotzei shar iro, and every single man was circumcised. Vayibash yom hashlishi b'yosem koavim, and it was on the third day after the circumcision when they were all in pain, and the point is they were all in pain at the same time. Vayiku shnei bnei Yaakov Shimon v'Levi. Shimon and Levi took their swords. They came to the city. Vayahargu kol zachar, and they killed every single man. Was it right what they did? Was it wrong? Vayomer Yaakov el Shimon ve'el Levi. Yaakov says to Shimon and Levi, Achartem osi lahavisheni biyoshvei haaretz. You're going to get me in trouble with my neighbors because they're going to take revenge for what you did. Now, okay, it's a little hard to understand. That's Yaakov's objection. He's not objecting to the act. He's objecting to the tactics that now he is vulnerable to revenge. Does he mean to say that what they did was wrong? And Yaakov doesn't have the last word. Vayomru, and they respond to him. Shimon and Levi respond to him. Hachazona yases achosenu. They should turn our sister into a prostitute. So what's the conclusion? What is the Torah telling us? Were they right? Were they wrong? Why is Yaakov not saying anything clear? The Torah doesn't tell us. It is completely unclear who's right, who's wrong. And there's one final passage at the end of Yaakov's life in the Parsha Vayechi, when Yaakov is on his deathbed and he gathers his family around him And he speaks individually to each child. And he says then, Shimon v'Levi achim, Shimon and Levi, klei chamas mecherosehem, your tools are the tools of war, besodam al tavo nafshi. I don't want to be involved with you. I don't want to be connected to you. You're violent. Ki ba'apam hargu ish. You kill people in rage, in anger. Orur apam ki uz. Cursed be your anger. It is too strong. You are too violent. So is this the final judgment? And if it is, why do we have to wait until the end of Yaakov's life to understand whether Shimon and Levi were right or wrong? It's a very, very difficult passage to understand. Aside from the personal angst of what Dinah must have gone through, and it's not even clear, but leaving aside the damage and the hurt, what's the evaluation? What's the judgment? What do we think about this? So let me start by asking a slightly different question. Shem, this young man, was guilty. Again, not exactly clear what, rape or seduction it was bad. What he did was wrong and it was bad. So he was guilty. But what about all the other men? All the other men that lived in the place, they didn't do anything. How could Shimon and Levi kill all of those innocent civilians? That's a very difficult question. And to this very difficult question, there are two classic answers. The first answer is given by the Rambam, Maimonides. The Rambam says that while the Jewish people, once we get to Mount Sinai, become obligated in all the mitzvos of the Torah, there is a separate set of laws overlapping called the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws. That is binding on all human beings. And one of those 7 is a requirement called dinim. Dinim means justice. What it means is every society, this is not a requirement that devolves on the individual, but on the society. Every society is required to have a judicial system, a system of justice. How you want to do it is up to you. What punishments you want to give is up to you. What laws you want to write, that's up to you. But you have to have a system of justice. It is not okay for a society to simply be lawless. Says the Rambam, the fact that Shem did this terrible thing and no one else in the town objected to him, reprimanded him, held him accountable, every single man was guilty. Their failure to prevent this from happening, or at least to protest, makes them guilty. And this is amazing. The Rambam says that Shimon and Levi had the right to kill all of these men because they had done something wrong. They were silent in the face of injustice. And keep in mind, Shem was the prince. That is, the Rambam is assuming you're required to speak up. A society is required to speak up when there's an injustice, even if the person who's doing it is very, very powerful. It's a tremendously important lesson to stand up for justice under all circumstances, that a society has to have a system of right and wrong. Martin Luther King once said, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. And all of the men there were guilty by their silence of this betrayal. And that is why Shimon and Levi did the right thing in killing them all. That's the Rambam. Okay. Hard to understand, hard to apply it, but that's what the Maimonides says. Let's now come to the Ramban, Nachmanides. The Ramban says something that is very, very important for us. He says that Shimon and Levi were wrong. They should not have done what they did. And the ultimate judgment of the Torah, of Yaakov and the Torah, is that they are criticized, they are indicted, they were wrong. Maybe they had the right to do something to punish Shem, but they had no right to do something to kill the innocent civilians of the town. In our day, this passage has transformed from a theoretical commentary to daily application in Israel. To what extent must we protect against civilian casualties? And as all of us realize following the news today, just now, this is one of the most important, dramatic issues that Israel faces today. The situation that Hamas created to use Gazans as human shields. How is Israel to defend itself? To what extent must it go to avoid civilian casualties? Our passage, this Ramban, this commentary of Nachmanides, this is the main source that is used by contemporary authorities in Jewish law to give their opinion on this issue. Because you understand, when the modern state of Israel was established in 1948, with it was established the IDF, the Israel Defense Force. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jews had to grapple with what are the laws, what are the rules about going to war? Now, of course, yes, Israel was established as a secular society, but it does certainly refer very often to Torah teaching. What does the Torah teach us about how we are to protect ourselves, how we are to engage in military activity? This is the source for this subject. One of the great authorities who was most active in translating the timeless Torah wisdom to apply to contemporary Israeli issues was Rabbi Shaul Yisraeli. And he says as follows. His first opinion is, based on a different passage in the Rambam Maimonides, that those who support terror, those who encourage violence, should be labeled as combatants. They're not innocent civilians. I know that you've seen the reports in the last few days that as hostages were being released from Gaza and they were being driven through Gaza to get to Israel in the vehicles of the International Red Cross, that citizens of Gaza, the people, were throwing stones, trying to push the cars over. I don't know percentages. I'm not on the ground, but it is clear that there certainly is a significant portion of the citizens of Gaza not affiliated with Hamas that are not unhappy that Jews have been killed. However, Rabbi Yisraeli says that practically speaking, we cannot rely on this opinion when it comes to actual killing. Because maybe there is a reason to excuse based on claims of fear, pressure. We hear, I have no way to evaluate this myself, that it is not physically possible for a person to object to Hamas. If you're living in Gaza and you speak up against Hamas, you do so at risk of your own life. And certainly it would not apply to all adults. And it most certainly does not apply to children. So Rabbi Yisraeli suggests a different approach. And this is an approach that is based on Maharal, who agrees with the Ramban, Nachmanides, that innocent civilians are not legally culpable. However, says the Maharal, Shimon and Levi feared retaliation. They were going to kill Shechem. Okay, let's say they had a right to kill Shechem. Now, what's going to happen? What's the reaction? Well, if they kill Shechem, all these people are going to come attack them. So what they did is they carried out a preemptive defensive strike against all of the males of the area of Shechem. And says Rabbi Yisraeli that in war, in a situation of war, it is permissible to have a preemptive defensive strike if that is the only possible way to create long-term security. If the only way to create long-term security is for Israel to dismantle Hamas, and the only way to dismantle Hamas means that civilian lives will be taken, nebuch, it's not our goal, it's a tragedy, but that becomes a permissible activity according to Jewish law, based on the actions of Shimon and Levi, according to Maharal. However, Rabbi Yisraeli says that 3 conditions are necessary in order to risk taking the lives of civilians. Number 1, it has to be necessary for the success of the mission. There's no other way to do it. Number 2, there is no other way to achieve the goal. Number 3, you are minimizing the danger to civilians as much as possible. Clearly, those 3 conditions are met with the IDF's activity in Gaza today. Now, how would that apply to Shimon and Levi? Well, they would have had to warn the citizens of the place what they were about to do, and to warn them if they were to retaliate, they would be in danger, and to give them the chance to flee. Of course, in our situation today, Hamas makes that impossible. That's exactly what we see happening today. Asa Kasher is an Israeli philosopher. He is the one who wrote the Israel Defense Force Code of Ethics. He's an incredible person. If you ever had the chance to read some of his writing, anything about him, Asa Kasher. He's very, very knowledgeable about Torah sources and also about international law, American law, etc. Listen to what Asa Kasher wrote. He wrote the book on military ethics for the IDF. He wrote, "Does the presence of large numbers of non-combatants in the vicinity of a building that is directly involved in terrorist assaults on Israelis render that building immune to Israeli attack? The answer is and must be no. Israel cannot forfeit its ability to protect its citizens against attacks simply because terrorists hide behind non-combatants. If it did so, it would be giving up any right to self-defense." And that's what we've seen in terms of the hospitals and the schools and the mosques and the other things where there's been great criticism of what Israel has done. And then it comes out that we see, of course, that Hamas was hiding there and using it as a shield. Attacking human shields is legitimate, Kasher wrote, because there's no such thing as a war without collateral damage. In all such cases, as much compassion as possible under the circumstances must be shown without aborting the mission or raising the risk to Israeli soldiers. Kasher's approach, which is the approach of the IDF, aligns with Rabbi Yisraeli's understanding of the Maharal. A number of years ago, there was an article in the Jerusalem Post, and there was a sergeant in the IDF. He happened to be a religious man. And he was talking about this issue of the need to protect enemy civilians, even though doing so raises the danger to Israeli soldiers and citizens. How do you balance that? And listen to what he said. The physical battlefield is a place where one meets their Creator. There are those who lose their humanity there, and there are those who can generate humanity even on the battlefield. Now that's actually kind of a paraphrase of a pasuk in the Torah, a verse in the Torah, in Dvarim, Deuteronomy, where the Torah says, Ki Hashem Elokecha mishalech b'kerev machanecha. Hashem, your God, will travel with you in your military campaigns, the Heyeh machanecha kadosh, and your military camp must be holy. Holy? A military camp? Yes. Holiness consists of humane treatment of even inhumane opponents under inhuman conditions. It is incredible to me, and it fills me with such pride that our heroes, the young men and women of the IDF, fulfill this requirement. They feel and they express this verse, Ki Hashem Elokecha mishalech b'kerev machanecha, that God himself is traveling with them in their military campaign. And by their humanity, upholding the ethics of the IDF, they create the Heyeh machanecha kadosh. Your military camp will be holy. They do this in many ways, and specifically in terms of the lesson that we learn in our Torah portion. We celebrate not only the might and expertise of the IDF, but also the holiness of the IDF, the Israel Defense Force. May God protect them, and may God protect the Jewish people. My friends, I wish you a good evening and a beautiful Shabbos, and I look forward to seeing you all soon in person.